All right, so this right here is incredibly important. I want to know if you can put down in the chat. I want to know how many of you have heard about what is going on with the lawsuit that happened within real estate. How many of you have heard about that? Not many? Not many? It just happened in August of 2024. So, what's typically when you're purchasing a house, the seller was the one that was paying the full fee for the buyer's realtor. The seller would pay that. Some people weren't aware that that was happening. The new lawsuit has documentation that is going to be required explaining that the seller might not pay for that. The reason for this, and it came about because many of the sellers thought that when they were paying, for example, 6%, that meant that they were paying it to the seller's realtor, the person that was representing them, and that they would get the 6%. Or that they would pay part of that 6% to the buyer's agent. Typically, in those situations, it would be 50-50. But that wasn't actually what was happening. People started noticing that some realtors were kind of taking advantage of the situation or the buyer's realtor. So the sellers got together and they started a civil lawsuit around the nation, and they ended up winning. And there were many different lawsuits involved in it. So the National Association of Realtors is the one that was actually being sued, and they had to come up with new legal paperwork that is affecting everybody in the nation. It's not just here in central Kentucky. It's not just my state. It's every single state, and every single person will be required to sign a new form and new paperwork called a buyer's representation agreement in any state. So this form is going to look a little bit different in each state, and even some brokerages will have a different form within their states too. I wanted to take some time to kind of show you some things you should pay attention to. One of the first things that you probably will notice in the form is they will have a length of agreement. Now, if you want to see any houses, you will be required by law to sign a contract with a real estate agent. It doesn't matter if you haven't met that person, they will make you sign a form before they even meet you in some cases. So I want you to recognize the length of time that is going to be related with that realtor. My recommendation is if you don't know that person, you haven't met them yet, but you want to go look at a house, put down 1 day. So just request that they put down 1 day. And the reason for that is if you do connect with that agent and you meet them for that one time and you start to recognize that you weren't sure, you can be done with that contract after that first meeting. And you should be able to have an interview with somebody to decide whether or not you want to go ahead with that one person. So my recommendation would be when you sign that contract with them, just put down 1 day. But when you actually interview somebody and want to work with them, you can put down the 3 to 6 months. When you sign that agreement for 3 to 6 months, one thing you need to put down is to make sure that there's a specific phrase in there that says that they can be released at any time without punishment and without owing anything. That additional part of without owing anything is very important because I have already noticed that there are some agents that don't have that part in the contract without owing. And then what ends up happening is if you sign a contract with them and now you're feeling like, I'm not going to use you, I'm going to have to go with somebody else, maybe because you find a real estate agent that knows sign language and the one that you're currently with doesn't, something like that, where you might like the agent, but you need to be released for whatever reason. You signed that contract with them. Now you're signing the release, which is fine, but inside the contract, it also says that you're still going to be responsible to pay them. So if you buy a house with the new realtor, you might still be responsible to pay them if you have that. It doesn't matter if that person didn't help you buy the house. If you are reading through the contract, I am available. So if there's something that you don't understand or doesn't sit right or you're not sure, take a picture and email it to me. I can read through it and I can start explaining it to you, okay? And that's for anybody. You can reach out to me. You have my contact information. My goal is to make sure that everything is clear for the people in the deaf community before they sign something. So the third thing that I want you to pay attention to that's a really important part of every contract, every single one of the contracts will have something in there that says a specific price or fee. So for example, I typically charge 3% as a buyer's agent. And in that agreement, that means when we submit an offer, I am going to put down in the offer that my fee is 3% and I'm requesting the seller to pay me that fee of 3%. But the seller could say, no, I'm only going to agree to pay 2%. Well, now you and I have an agreement saying that I am going to be paid 3%, so you will be responsible to pay me that additional 1% per our contract. Is that clear for everybody? Now I'm going to move on and say, that's so funny. I see Beth feeling like this is a lot. I know. I'm going to expand a little bit more on this part, but I want to emphasize that this is new paperwork, but I need you to know that you could be responsible for this, and it's new for everybody. It's new, but I wanted to make sure and add this in here and add a lot of time in the webinar on this. If you don't have money to pay your real estate agent, you can have a conversation because otherwise you would be stuck. So during your interview process, one of the questions that you should ask is whether or not they're willing to negotiate if the seller is not willing to pay the buyer's agent fee. You can put that down in the contract. So for example, and so far I have had no issue with the seller being willing to pay my fee. Since that lawsuit has been passed, I have not had any issue with that. It has not been a problem. I did experience one time where a seller was saying, I'm actually only going to pay 2.5%. And that meant that my buyer would have been responsible to pay me 0.5% of the sale of that property. But that buyer, it would have been like $750 extra for him, and he was a single dad. There's no way that he could have afforded to pay me that additional $750. Now, I am not going to force him to pay me that amount of money. So we could have definitely renegotiated the contract to change it to that 2.5%. But what I ended up doing first is I went back to the seller and I explained, I said, hey, my buyer is unable to pay this. Would you be willing to pay the full 3%? And she actually came back immediately and said that that was no problem. So we were able to renegotiate with the seller and it was no issue for her to pay my full fee. Most realtors, if they are ethical, will be willing to change and negotiate that contract to match what needs to be done in order to get you into that contract. But these are 3 things that are in that contract that I want you to be aware of, and you will be seeing, and make sure you have that language in each of those forms. I want you to make sure that you know it so that you're not taken advantage of. Hopefully that is clear for everybody, and if not, you can put down your questions and I can discuss that a little bit more, okay?